welcome back. In this video, we'll be reading another chapter of Christopher Robin by Disney. Chapter 9. Ow, 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 ow. The pain in Christopher's head jolted him awake. Gingerly, he reached up and ran his fingers over the top of his head. A large bump was already forming, and even the most tentative of touches sent a shawl of pain streaking all the way down to his toes. He let out another groan, but it turned into a yelp when Christopher realized the water had risen while he had been unconscious. It was now all the way up to his chest. "Pooh!" Christopher shouted, panic filling him. "Pooh!" He didn't want to be stuck in a hole in the middle of the 100-acre wood. He needed to see Evelyn and Madeline. He needed to tell them how much he loved them and how sorry he was and how much... "Hello, Christopher Robin." Looking up, Christopher nearly wept when he saw Pooh peering down at him from the top of the hole. The bear's familiar face was the best thing Christopher had seen in a long, long time. "Oh, thank goodness you're all right," he said. "Can you help me?" he added as the water level rose. "Of course," Pooh answered. Nodding, Christopher began to look around to see how they could make this work. "Okay," he said. "I think I could get some leverage if you could just pass me a rope or—" Splash! The sound of a rather large object hitting the water next to him startled Christopher Robin, and he let out a shout. A moment later, Pooh popped up from beneath the surface and began treading water beside him. The bear seemed completely unafraid of the fact that he was now swimming a hole that was designed to catch heffalumps. He looked over at Christopher and gave him a smile. "What did you do that for?" Christopher asked, dumbfounded. "You seem lonely down here," Pooh answered. "But now we're both stuck," Christopher said, his voice coming uncomfortably close to a whine. "And there are heffalumps and woozles out here. We're not safe at all." Just then his briefcase floated by. Reaching out, Christopher grabbed it. Then he grabbed Pooh and tried to get him on top of it. If they both had to be trapped, the least he could do was protect Pooh. "We must get out of here, but I'm not sure what to do anymore." Pooh, who had not complained when Christopher grabbed him and shoved him on top of the briefcase, looked down at him. His eyes were calm, and he did not seem to notice the water splashing up and over him, soaking his fur. "Sometimes the thing to do is nothing," he finally said with a shrug. In the water beside him, Christopher stopped struggling. "Nothing?" he repeated. Pooh nodded. "It often leads to the best something." As the bear spoke, the briefcase beneath him shifted in the moving water, throwing him off balance. Pooh slipped off the briefcase and sank under the water. Within moments, all that could be seen of the bear was a trail of bubbles that rose to the surface. Oddly enough, Christopher didn't feel a sense of panic as he watched the bear disappear. Instead, he felt eerily calm. There was a dreamy quality to everything. The water didn't even feel cold as it rose higher and higher up to his chest. He wondered if he was actually drowning. He had heard that people who drowned often just slip into unconsciousness. Maybe that was what was happening to him. He stopped treading water and let himself sink. Down, down, down he went, until his backside touched the bottom of the hole. Looking over, he saw Pooh calmly sitting on the ground. He was breathing normally, and when he spoke, the words did not gurgle the one would expect if they were listening to someone else speak underwater. "It's quite nice, isn't it?" Pooh asked. "Yes, quite nice," Christopher said, but he was beginning to think that it was all a bit too nice. Something was not right. Then he glanced at his hands, or rather where his hands had been. They had been transformed into heffalump hands, and when he reached up to touch his ears, he realized they were the large floppy ears of a heffalump. His eyes growing wide, he turned to Pooh for help, but the frightened bear frantically began to swim away from him. Desperately, Christopher reached out to comfort his friend, but instead of his arm, a large trunk moved through the water. It extended toward Pooh, and then before Christopher knew what was happening, the trunk sucked Pooh up. Christopher started spinning around and around. He had to get out of this hole, but every time he spun around, he came face to face with another heffalump, a heffalump version of him. He couldn't escape the creature. He couldn't escape himself. As he spun faster and faster, he felt as though the air was being sucked from his lungs, and then one of the other heffalumps' trunks connected to him. He felt a strong pull, and then, just like Pooh, he was sucked into the creature's trunk. Christopher woke with a gasp. His breath heaved with his chest, and he felt his heart pounding. It had been a dream. There were no heffalumps, no powerful trunks. He was alive. But as he took stock of his actual situation, he realized he wasn't much better off. While he had been unconscious, the water had risen. He imagined to stay afloat by clinging to the briefcase, just like Pooh had been doing in his dream. It had acted like a life preserver, but the rain was still falling. Christopher knew he needed to quickly find a way out of the hole. Just then his hand slipped on the briefcase and he slid into the water. He flashed back to his dream and he felt the panic he should have felt then started to fill him. But before panic overwhelmed him, Christopher felt his feet hit the bottom. Pushing back up, he burst through the surface of the water with a triumphant cry. The water was filling the hole. So if he just waited... Just do nothing, Christopher said, echoing Pooh's words. Floating onto his back, Christopher let his arms spread out and his legs lift up. Underneath him, his overcoat billowed out so that from above he looked like he was flying on a beige raft. And then he just did nothing. He did nothing as the rain continued to fall and the water in the hole rose higher and higher. He did nothing as the sky began to brighten and the stars began to fade. He did absolutely nothing until finally he could do something. When the water neared the top of the hole, he flipped out onto his front and swam to the edge. He then pulled himself up onto the surrounding solid ground and collapsed. He lay there for a long moment, enjoying the feel of the dirt beneath him and the steadiness of the ground. When he had caught his breath, he turned back to the hole, fished out his briefcase and umbrella, and stood up. He was out of the trap. He was free. Now he needed to go find Pooh. Taking off into the woods, Christopher shouted out the names of his friends. Pooh, Eeyore, he called. Anyone? No answer came. But still he kept going. The woods weren't that big. He had to run into someone eventually. And then just like that, he saw something he recognized. Slowly he grinned as Pooh Stick's bridge came into view. He moved closer. Christopher's grin grew wider. Sure enough, there was a sign that read Pooh Sticks. One side was labeled Dropping Sid, and the other was labeled Watchin' Sid. He couldn't remember the number of times he and Pooh had come here to play their made-up game. It was so simple and silly, dropping a stick from one side of the bridge and running to the other to watch it appear. But it had been entertained them for hours upon hours. Walking onto the bridge, Christopher looked over the railing onto the dropping side. His reflection stared back at him, but the person looking up at him wasn't a young boy full of innocence. The face that stared back at him was old and caked in drying gray mud. Frowning, Christopher picked up a stick at his feet and threw it down, shattering the reflection. Then, out of habit, he stepped to the opposite side of the bridge to watch his stick float by. But instead of a stick, he saw Eeyore, the pessimistic donkey, floating out from under the bridge. He was on his back, staring up at the sky with a frown on his face. Upon seeing Christopher, the dour look only deepened. Just my luck, he said, his voice saddened. A heffalump, leering at his lunch. Eeyore, Christopher shouted happily. I'm not a heffalump. He was so glad he had finally found one of his friends that he was even upset they had been mistaken for an elephant-like creature. The donkey shrugged. Doesn't matter anyway, he said. Heading for the waterfall. Be gone soon. Turning, Christopher looked in the direction Eeyore was floating. Sure enough, there was a waterfall. Swim! Swim! He shouted to the donkey. But Eeyore made no attempt to swim. Instead, he somehow managed to start floating faster. As Christopher watched, the donkey's body disappear briefly as it dipped down one of the smaller falls leading to the larger one. The water turned rougher as Eeyore entered the faster-moving part of the stream. He was getting closer and closer to the large waterfall. If Christopher didn't do something, he would lose another friend before he had even really found him. Racing off the bridge, Christopher began to run along the shore, calling out to Eeyore as he did. Maybe it's for the best, Eeyore responded, his voice monotone, despite the dire circumstances he was facing. Can't change the inevitable. Just have to go with the flow. Approaching a spot on the shore that jutted out into the water, Christopher slipped and slid down until his toes touched the stream. He reached out his hand as Eeyore flowed past, but it was no use. The donkey was too far out and his arms weren't long enough. "Don't worry, Eeyore," he shouted. "I'm not," Eeyore said. "One mustn't complain." "I'll save you." Dramatically whipping off his overcoat, Christopher threw it on the ground, ran along the bank, and then dove into the water. But to his surprise and pain, he didn't dive down far. The water was only a few feet deep. Christopher stood up, dripping once again. "Oh, right," he said, starting to smile. "I'm grown now." The smile grew wider as he realized how ridiculous he must have looked, and how little he cared. He started to laugh, lightly at first, and the laugh grew and grew until tears spilled from the corners of his eyes. Standing there, wiping them away, Christopher tried to remember the last time he had laughed that hard. Sadly, he honestly had no idea. "Laughing at my misfortune. Oh well," Eeyore said. Eeyore's ho-hum remarks snapped Christopher back to the present, and he quickly waded over to the donkey. Grabbing him just before he went over the waterfall, Christopher then carried him out back to the riverbank, wringing him out like one might wring out a dishcloth. Christopher gently placed Eeyore on the ground. "Hello, Eeyore," he said. "Hello, Heffalump," Eeyore replied. Christopher smiled, the feeling less foreign this time around. "I'm not a Heffalump," he said. "I'm Christopher Robin, the one who used to try and cheer you up." Eeyore shrugged. "I don't remember being cheery." Knowing it would do no good to try to explain, Christopher changed the subject. "How did you end up in the water?" he asked instead. "Woke up, windy, house blew down, fell in the river, can't swim." Eeyore listed his woes matter-of-factly with no emotion. "Just another windy morning for me." In the distance, a Heffalump, or whatever it had been that Christopher had heard that night before, let out a terrible roar. Eeyore looked over at Christopher. "It's your fellow Heffalumps calling you home." Rather than attempt to once again explain that he was not a Heffalump, Christopher decided to try instead to get to the bottom of this very puzzling mystery of the missing friends. Narrowing his eyes, he put a finger to his chin. When he was a boy, he and Pooh would play detective. Putting a finger to one's chin was always a good way to start. "So," he said, "everyone woke up. It was a Wednesday day." Eeyore nodded. "And where does everyone go on a Wednesday day?" Picking Eeyore up at that point, Christopher slung him over his shoulder and began to walk back towards Pooh Stick's bridge. From over Christopher's shoulder, Eeyore sighed. "Beats me," he said. "Nobody invites me anywhere." "Well," Christopher thought, "like it or not, Eeyore, you're coming with me now. We're going to find out where everyone goes on a Wednesday day. And hopefully, wherever that place was, it would be where Christopher would find Pooh." Chapter 10. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for the next chapter. See you next time.